Welcome to a new video on the Photography Minimalist. In this video we're going to be talking in great detail about the Rollei XF35. But before we get started, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel. Let me give you a short introduction why I'm interested in this camera. Well, first of all, to be honest, I've owned about 5 of these Rollei XF35s. And previously only for one reason: to buy them cheap and to sell them again with a profit. These cameras are going up considerably in price the last few years, and there's a specific reason for that. First of all, the quality of the lens, and second, because it's getting more and more difficult to find a Rollei XF35 in perfect condition, both cosmetically on the outside and also mechanically on the inside. So if you ever come across a Rollei XF35 for a reasonable price, jump at it, buy the camera, but make sure that it is in full working condition. It is a very good investment. So that was a short introduction on my behalf. Now let's dive into more details with regards to this camera. There is one thing I would like to mention before we dive into this Rollei XF35, and that is the tip that I will give you in this video: how to manipulate the camera. This is a fully automatic camera, which means it automatically establishes a shutter speed and corresponding aperture. And I'm going to give you a tip how you can manipulate this camera and almost use it in an aperture priority mode. That could become interesting if you want to create a shallow depth of field. So stay tuned. Let's have a closer look at the Rollei XF35, which on the bottom plate mentions that it is made in Singapore. The lens is a Sonar 40mm 2.3 made by Rollei and under the license of Carl Zeiss. It has 5 lenses and 4 elements incorporated into this lens. And this is one of the main features of this camera, and that is the quality of the lens. It is a manual focus camera. We have a manual focus ring on the lens, and when you look through the viewfinder, the intention is to superimpose 2 images together or on top of each other, meaning that your subject is in focus. Besides that, it's a very straightforward camera. We have a 10-second self-timer lever. We have a small lever at the bottom of the lens to change the camera from automatic to bulb mode or bulb to automatic. When you put it to bulb mode, the only aperture the camera can use is 2.3, and that's something to take into account. So when you're making long exposures, you only have an aperture of 2.3, making this camera in bulb mode only interesting for very specific subjects. On the front we have a dial in the lens mount, which enables you to change the ISO of the film. You only have 3 options: 100, 200 or 400 ISO. There is something that I would like to explain to you with regards to the shutter speeds. Each shutter speed is synced to a fixed aperture. The apertures range from 2.3 to 16, and the shutter speeds at the low end go from 1/30th of a second to 1/650th of a second. At the lower end, the 1/30th of a second always syncs to 2.3, and at the high end, the 1/650th of a second always syncs to f16, and the shutter speeds in between accordingly also to their own synced apertures. So 1/60th of a second, 1/125th of a second, and 1/250th of a second. When you look at starting from the bottom all the way up to 1/250th of a second, we're talking about 1-stop increments. And that's very strange that they also jump from 1/250th to 1/650th of a second, because that is 1 1/3 of a stop. Normally you would go to 1/500th of a second. It's a little bit awkward for this camera. But besides that, the camera is very straightforward. Of course, we have the cocking mechanism, we have a film counter, we have a somewhat awkward rectangular shutter release button, which also can incorporate an external shutter release, the film rewind knob, a hot shoe, a tripod mount, and the battery compartment. Now for my tip on manipulating the light metering system on the Rollei XF35. Of course, you can change the ISO level, often not sufficient. And as we see, the light metering system is incorporated within the lens. So the easiest way to sufficiently manipulate the light metering system is by attaching an ND filter, which is a 46mm thread. Now the light metering system falls behind this ND filter. The ND filter lets much less light into the lens. Therefore, we're going to get lower shutter speeds, and lower shutter speeds with this Rollei XF means wider apertures. Wider apertures in turn mean shallower depth of field. This is, in my humble opinion, the cheapest and the easiest way to manipulate the light metering system. Preferably you could buy a variable ND filter instead of this fixed 8 ND filter, so you have more control. And another thing you need to take into account is that when this camera goes one stop down in aperture, it also goes one stop down in shutter speed. So your ND filter, the amount of light it lets through, will need to compensate for that. Now with regards to the tip I gave you, this is also applicable for other cameras with the similar light metering system built into the lens. For example, I have here a Konica C35 rangefinder, similar system. You can also use the tip I mentioned. And I also have here a Rollei Mat autofocus, same situation. So again, to a certain extent, you can manipulate these cameras and almost make them an aperture priority camera. Now, the video which you will see now is made at the NDSM shipping docks north of Amsterdam. It started in 1897 and they ceased business in 1979. And it's an area of about 225 acres of shipbuilding, ship repairing docks and buildings. And it's turned into an artist and event complex. So it's a very interesting area to make photographs. When you're watching the video, watch closely at two more or less similar pictures. One is a little bit framed a little bit differently than the other. My apologies for that, I wasn't using a tripod. But if you look closely at these two pictures, you will see a difference in depth of field. And that's all related to the tip I gave you in this video. Enjoy that, and thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.